Whenever a new Hunger Games book comes out, it's almost always immediately followed by a Hunger Games social media renaissance, which is always great because it gives me the perfect excuse to rewatch all the movies. But this time around, I rewatch all the movies with a specific purpose in mind. I'm going to talk about the set design and filming locations of all 5 movies in the Hunger Games cinematic universe. We'll go over all the fan favorite locations like the Victor's living quarters in Catching Fire and the tar trap in Mockingjay. And we'll also talk about the filming locations from the Hunger School musical, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. But before we do all that, let's talk about the movie that started it all.
I volunteer as tribute.
As is the case for most book-to-movie adaptations, the first Hunger Games movie had the lowest budget out of all of them, which meant that the production team didn't have the capital yet to film in a bunch of different locations, so the majority of the film was shot in North Carolina. The District 12 scenes were filmed in the Henry Mill Village, which is a historic site in North Carolina that's filled with these rundown houses, and judging by the street signs, it seems like the Mill Village is visited pretty frequently. Thankfully, these houses are vacant, so fans of the series are welcome to visit, so there's no harm in taking a few pictures, unlike that one house from that other popular movie franchise that you definitely shouldn't be pulling up to anytime soon unless you want to go from being a fan visitor to a fan trespasser. The tributes interviews were filmed in the Night Theater in Charlotte, and the arena scenes were shot in the DuPont State Forest in North Carolina as well, but apart from that, most of the other scenes were shot in studio sets like the Tribute Training Center and the Capitol Train. But now, let's move on to the second movie. I couldn't have said it better myself. 8 is exactly what they did when it comes to the production design in Catching Fire. It's by far my favorite movie out of all of them, and in my opinion, it's also the most visually cohesive from a production design standpoint. Let's start off with the filming location that seems to have everybody in a full-on chokehold, the Marriott Marquis Hotel in Atlanta, which is where they filmed the scenes in the Victor's living quarters. This building has been absolutely ran through. It's been used in a bunch of other productions like the Loki series, and it was also used as a reference for the design of the Harkonnen architecture in the Dune movies. So the production team knew that this was a great filming location, and they used it to its full extent. Like for example, they originally planned to build the set for Candace's room in a studio, but they ended up building it in the hotel itself, specifically in one of the balcony corridors that face the atrium of the hotel. Why did they do that? Well, it made more sense from a visual continuity standpoint to have the windows in the room facing the atrium as they would if it were an actual room in the hotel. And yeah, they also shot the scene where Joanna uses the elevator as her own personal changing room in the actual hotel, so take that as you will. Alright, let's talk about the arena scenes because those scenes were filmed in 2 different locations. All the scenes where the tributes are running through the jungle or vibing by the shoreline were filmed in Hawaii, but they specifically filmed the shoreline scenes in the Turtle Bay Resort because the bay has this very unique crescent-shaped shoreline that matched perfectly with the circular profile that they were looking for the arena. The scenes that feature the cornucopia section of the arena were filmed in the Clayton County Water Park in Atlanta. They chose to film there because the park has this circular man-made pool in it that was the perfect shape for the cornucopia sequence. They actually had to drain the pool so that they could build the set on it, and then they refilled it to film the scenes. They only built 1/12 of the cornucopia because every segment is identical, but they didn't film the scenes where the cornucopia starts to spin in that set. They built a different set piece for that sequence that was mounted on a rotating base. For the design of the Capitol, the production team wanted to capture the essence of a city that serves as a seat of power, so they looked at buildings and monuments from the real world that gave off that powerful aura that they were gunning for. Think of places like the US Capitol building or the Arc de Triomphe. They noticed that a lot of these places are more horizontal in scale than they are vertical. So they didn't want to have these huge soaring spires in the Capitol because they don't convey that feeling of power as much as these wider buildings that cover huge chunks of land do. This is why they decided to film the tribute parade scenes in the Atlanta Motor Speedway because it provided enough space to fully capture the horizontal scope of the Capitol that they were looking for, and it's probably the first time that something that runs on 2 horsepower has ever been used in that racetrack. Another filming location that was used heavily in this movie and the last 2 movies was the Swan House in Atlanta. This is where they shot the Capitol party scene where the Capitol citizen offers PETA a drink that makes you sick so you can eat more. And the Capitol citizens might be wasteful, but the film crew definitely wasn't because they used the Swan House for a bunch of different scenes like the Capitol party scene, the interior of Snow's mansion, and some of the interior shots of Candace's home in the Victor's village. Okay, let's talk about the Mockingjay movies because this is when the film crew finally got their very much deserved semester abroad, which is usually what people do to like find themselves. But in this case, the film crew took it as an opportunity to find amazing filming locations for this movie, and they were very successful at that. They realized that the Swan House wasn't cutting it anymore. They needed a bigger space for President Snow's mansion, and this is where the Chateau de Boissons comes in, which is a massive neoclassical mansion in France that's actually relatively close to the Palace of Versailles, which has seen its own fair share of revolutions. In Mockingjay Part 1, most of the scenes were shot on built sets, with a few exceptions, like Snow's mansion, which we just talked about, and the ruins of District 12. They filmed the District 12 scenes at an old textile mill in Atlanta that was going to be torn down anyway, and this worked out perfectly for the production team because they were able to work directly with the demolition crew and ask them to tear down parts of the building to make it more convincing. They were basically editing the scene, but with C4 instead of CGI. The first Mockingjay movie is by far the most set-intensive film in the whole trilogy, and for good reason. The majority of the film takes place in District 13, which is an underground military base, so filming on location on a real military base was definitely out of the question unless they had like the Pentagon on speed dial, which wasn't the case. The production team wanted to create an enclosed and claustrophobic environment, so they drew inspiration from aircraft carriers, which provided them with a much needed real-world reference for the set design. One of the main design features that they wanted to include was low ceilings, which is something you'd expect to see in a real military bunker. But sets with low ceilings make it difficult for the lighting team to properly illuminate the scene and keep the lighting equipment out of view. Think of things like sitcom sets. They usually never have ceilings because that space is reserved for all the lighting equipment. To get around that issue, the film crew had to get creative with their lighting techniques by incorporating visible light fixtures into their set pieces instead of relying on hidden ones. For example, the table in the control room. They didn't just add lights to it just for the vibes. It served a practical function of lighting up the space for filming. They also wanted the sets to connect with each other as they would in real life. So the command room directly overlooks the command center set. The idea was to give off the impression that District 13 is an actual interconnected bunker. Since splitting up the sets would actually risk breaking that illusion, it's all about visual continuity in these movies. Okay, if Mockingjay Part 1 was the most set-intensive film in the whole trilogy, then Mockingjay Part 2 was the most location-heavy one. Let's start off with what I consider to be the most unique filming location in the film, the Palace of Abraxas in France. This is where they shot the scene where the rebel raiding party turns into a pool party. They chose this location because it was an enclosed structure with a circular central courtyard that could believably sell the idea of a Capitol building that could be filled with black sludge. Since the Capitol serves as the arena in this movie, they wanted to shoot in locations that have very unique and distinct architectural elements that could be edited in post-production to look like convincing booby traps. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, the Capitol underground scenes were filmed in the Macadam underpass in Berlin because it has these cylindrical light fixtures that could be edited to appear as if they were shooting out beams of light. The Capitol street scenes where Tigress's apartment is located was filmed in a building complex in France, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce its name because I'll butcher it, but I'll put it up on the screen. The scenes in the meeting room where Katniss realizes that the two presidents are just two sides of the same coin were filmed in the Chateau de Boissons. The garden-facing side of Snow's mansion was also filmed in the chateau as well. As for the scenes that feature Snow's greenhouse, those were shot in two different locations. They filmed the interior of the greenhouse in Atlanta, and you'd think that they would have filmed it inside some random greenhouse, but they actually built the entire set from scratch. The exterior shots of the greenhouse were fully CGI, except for the entryway, which was the set piece that they built in the garden of the chateau so that they could capture a shot of it in the background while Katniss walks into the greenhouse to make it look as if it were actually on the grounds of Snow's mansion. The front-facing side of Snow's mansion, where Candace says her final goodbyes, was shot in the Swan House back in Atlanta.
Children from each district to fight to the death in the Hunger Games.
From District 12, Lucy Gray Baird.
Alright, let's talk about Hunger Games the musical. Mockingjay Part 2 was the most location-heavy movie in the trilogy, but overall, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes takes the cake. They only built like one set for this movie, which was the set for Snow's apartment. Everything else was shot on location, but they absolutely went all in on the design of Snow's apartment. The amount of detail they put in is absolutely crazy. For starters, they built the set so that it looked like a snowflake if you were looking down at it from above. And I know what you're thinking. A snowflake-shaped apartment for the Snow family, it's a little bit too on the nose, but I feel like it's subtle enough that it doesn't feel gimmicky, and honestly, I don't think it's evident at all that it's shaped like a snowflake if you're just watching the movie for the first time. Apart from that, they added a lot of small details when decorating the set, like the stained glass window that has Snow's father on it. The whole idea was to make the apartment look as unwelcoming as possible. Nothing about it is supposed to feel warm or inviting. Let's move on to the filming locations, because a lot of them look so otherworldly that you would think that they were built sets. Like for example, the Capitol classroom wasn't a set. It's a real anatomy theater in the Humboldt University of Berlin. The reason the seating is so claustrophobic and constricted is that they would perform live dissections there, so people needed to be as close to the center as possible to get a good view. The arena scenes were shot in two buildings. The exterior of the arena was filmed in the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, which is an open-air Olympic stadium. The interior was filmed in an enclosed arena in Poland called the Centennial Hall. And you can obviously guess why they decided to film on two different locations. Filming in an open-air stadium would be a logistical nightmare, but in the movie, they're both open air, since the rebels decided to do a Molotov makeover and blow the whole roof off. The command center scenes, where the mentors are watching the Hunger Games play out, were filmed in an arena that's in the same building complex as the Olympic Stadium in Berlin. And you'll notice that the seating is very cramped in the arena, and the reason for that is because this is where the Olympic fencing events were held, so people needed to be closer to the stage to see what was going on. And that wraps up our deep dive on the set design and filming locations of all the Hunger Games movies. I'm curious to know what you guys' favorite location is, so drop a comment down below and let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video.